Hello everyone, welcome to the Idea Roastery. I'm Jason.
And I'm Herman.
Herman, when you were younger, were you ever part of a forum?
Ooh, that's actually a really good question, and I wasn't expecting it. Was I part of forum? Yes, I was briefly, or not that briefly, but I was part of the NAG magazine forum. So NAG it was a gaming magazine, New Age Gamer. And it wasn't just games, it was also computer hardware because those went hand in hand back in the day. And the only big issue that I had with it is that I didn't actually have internet at home growing up. And so I had joined it on internet cafe that was near my school that I would go and hang out in the afternoons every now and then, and go and talk about the latest games and stuff. But I wasn't prolifically involved in forums growing up. What about yourself?
So I was quite into building Counter-Strike source maps. So there
Nice.
were a couple of forums around that topic, and it was basically just getting a lot of tutorials and advice as you build them out. And it was actually quite cool that Counter-Strike source had that, where you could I think it was
I
you
did
could
like that,
download a
yeah.
mod kit and you could just start building these really cool maps. And it was actually I think it was actually one of the sort of introductions to programming, really, because at that point I hadn't learned Java, I hadn't learned to code. I was just kind of click and drag and building stuff. But what were some of the really good things about being part of that forum that you really liked?
So it was a niche group. It was a small group. And by small, I mean, only a couple thousand people. But realistically, only about 100 to 200 people were actually active. We all shared a specific interest, PC gaming. And PC gaming at the time was it's not like gaming is now where it's super accessible to everyone. Back then, you had to have some certain amount of technical competence in order to actually do that, especially if you were doing things like hosting LAN parties, which, as our generation knows, setting your subnet mask manually and making sure that you've got a switch router and, getting the games onto everyone's computers and, cheeky crack into games so that, you didn't require 20 licenses. Um, and so the conversations were focused and they were amicable. And I think political discourse hadn't really ramped up. Political discourse only really started getting wild in just 2015, 2016, if we're entirely honest. So people just spoke about games and gaming, and they'd be like, "Hey, check my game rig setup," or someone would post a question about why is this breaking, and a couple responses would help them figure it out. And it was a good space to be in. It was a nice
Were
space.
you were you only in one, or were you in multiple forums? Or was there a point where you went from just being in one forum to a couple, or did like me, Facebook just came along and
Facebook came
everyone?
along. Facebook
Yeah.
came along and ate everyone's lunch.
And what do you think would some of the what drew you to Facebook in the first place? Because I know now you're not that into social media, and but I think at some point everyone was on Facebook.
So Facebook is an interesting one, actually. So I write a lot about how I left social media, and I haven't been on traditional social media like your Instagrams and Facebooks and such for about 8 years now. Um, the reason why I left is actually, and this is a big misconception, is not that I don't like social media. I actually really like the idea of social media. I dislike what social media has become. And what social media has become is it's a short form content machine and an outrage generator. So, Facebook back in, let's call it 2012 to 2014 was actually really cool because everyone was on it. And it had a mostly chronological timeline. And I didn't see other people's posts, and they hadn't really ramped up their marketing game yet. So it was people sharing things about their day and thoughts and photos. And there was also the poke function where you could poke each other for some reason. And it was also pre the influencer era. So it was you just went and you became friends with your friends. You didn't follow like Beyonce or that she's not really an influencer as much as a celebrity. Celebrities were still a thing back then, but like the influencer, the internet influencer came a little bit later. Um, and so it was really just like a place to go and socialize. It was a social network. And I actually think that Facebook during that time was really cool. Um, but if you compare it to what social media is now, like people talk about TikTok like it's social media, but it's not social media. You're not socializing with anyone over there. There's no social aspects. What it is it is a content machine that is created explicitly to keep you focused on there for as long as possible. The same with Instagram. I see Twitter has also added TikTok-like reels. If you play a video, it's just going to carry on flipping you to the next video in perpetuity. Um, uh, Pinterest, which isn't a social media, but they're going in the same method. I think every platform inevitably becomes TikTok because TikTok managed to manufacture digital crack, and everyone's like, oh wow, people really like crack. And it turns out people do really like crack, and that's why it's a regulated substance.
Yeah, for sure. And do you think that it has anything to do with, I guess, the normies getting into it? Because I think when you think about the forums in the past, it was mostly around technical topics. It was mostly for the enthusiasts who were really into that topic, so much so that they went out of their way to go and join in and communicate there. But as Facebook came along and some of these newer platforms, it made it more accessible. And do you think there's more of a do you think it's more like just accessibility, that there's more people involved in social media, that they've sort of come, I see it as like they've sort of catered to the lowest common denominator in a sense, is that they kind of want to, benefit everybody. I know Facebook, when they talk about it, or Zuckerberg, he talks about like there is as you said, like there's something about being connected with people. I think if you look at like WhatsApp, it's good to have, ability to communicate over the internet. I do think that's a good thing. But I think in trying to bring everyone along into that platform, it's actually made it into this really sort of not so nice arena where you have kind of like quite a general like layperson coming on, and they're just like learning or they're just using the social media just as a form of entertainment rather than to communicate with each other.
I think that that's a really good question. And to be honest, I think that it's less about that and it's more about commercial interests, right? Is that, as the internet became more accessible, more and more people would find their way on it. But the design, the explicit design of these platforms is what ended up making them into what they are today, not necessarily because of the people that are using it. I mean, okay, also partially because of that, not one without the other. But like there were, non-technical forums of people doing like flower arranging. I'm so sorry. They just started hammering next door. It's just going to be part of our podcast for a bit. Um, but if, for example, and I think that this is a really great example of how these platforms made decisions to optimize away from being social media and towards being content machines. And that is instead of having connections like friends where we have to mutually follow each other, we instead created followers, right? So you could have a person go and amass followers even though they didn't have a connection back to them, right? Which means that you could now go and you could amass a lot more content to sift through and engage with instead of forming social connections with your friends. The second one over there is to move away from a chronological timeline or a timeline of seeing what it is that people said and starting injecting things that are related to things that you might be interested in. And I think that that is just like a perfect example of we're optimizing for something else. We're optimizing
Mm.
for engagement. We're not optimizing for social connection.
Yeah, I think I agree. The the change into this follower behavior, I think, came about because if you think of a small group of your friends, like I mean, in the beginning days, no one really posted, or they did at the beginning, but over time, people kind of like, they get distracted, they've got job responsibilities. And so you end up with like a dead timeline where there's nothing going on. And in fact, some of the social media sort of experiments or, forays I went into were like things like, like 9gag. I don't know if you remember those. It was like lots of people posting quite funny, like interesting content. But at some point you would start to see the same content coming up again and again. And although I was like enjoying being in like those social media groups, at the point that you start to see the same content, you like start to check out. You're like, at this point, I'm just like not even getting any value from it. You're just kind of re-engaging. And you could kind of see that cog in that machine of like, here's more content and here's the same content. And okay, so now you're just like enforcing like the commercialization of that platform. But I think what's changed since those times is obviously because of more people being on the platforms and the incentives that they've now created, where you have creators that are creating on the platform in order to get follows. It means that you've now got, it's not the platforms themselves that are pushing the content. It's more just, people that are trying to, make some money and make a quick buck. And it's, in a sense, you're actually using capitalism to kind of like fuel the continuation of this content machine, as you put it. But what part do you think self-control plays in the whole social media aspect? Because we know it's addictive. Is it? Yeah. How do you view like people's self-control, or how people should approach social media?
I know that this comes up in a few of our episodes, but it was Charlie Munger or Munger. I've only ever read his name. Who said, "Show me the incentive and I'll show you the outcome," or something along the lines of that. And so these social media platforms went, and they're based on advertising revenue, which means that they need to keep you on platform for as long as they possibly can. And so if they're optimizing for you being on platform and you viewing these ads, then they're obviously going to optimize towards the most addictive content, right? And humans are, there are a couple of things that humans really like. Like we've got these, Neolithic systems in our brain that crave social acceptance, that crave new information and novelty. And in the same way that we crave sugar and high-fat food, right? And then you have, the extreme ends like heroin, where you actually just go directly to the good juices in the brain that are just like, this is exactly what I wanted. And so what happens with social media is that we've kind of made digital crack. We've optimized it to really like hook into the brain in such a way that it is incredibly addictive to be on there all the time. And one of the reasons that I'm not on it is because even though I'm a person who exercises a lot of self-control, I work out regularly, I eat well, I have good relationships, is I could not trust myself with having crack in my pocket the entire time, right? It's like if you are trying to lose weight, you don't keep cookies in your pocket the entire time. If you're trying to stop drinking alcohol, you don't keep alcohol in the house. And so I had to just delete all of my social media accounts. And so I see some people who are like, oh, I deleted Instagram for a month. But they're talking about deleting the app, right? And that's kind of like if you're an alcoholic, taking the booze out of the house and putting it in the garage. It's like you can very easily get it out of the garage, right? So I kind of had to just delete all of it. And to be entirely honest, nothing changed. I just had more free time in my day. And I'm also not as riled up about all the political stuff that's happening in the world right now because I'm just like more out of the loop than most people. And I'm quite happy with that because everyone seems quite angry about it.
Yeah, I think just like the stepping out of the news cycle is definitely something that I've seen as valuable. Even though I am on social media, I tend to block or not follow like BBC and those kind of things, and I definitely feel a lot more relaxed because of it, because the general nature of content like that is it's like always it's always breaking news, it's always like something you need to be involved in. And I'm also like, over time I've got more of like a sort of Zen philosophy of like, don't react to everything. So even when I see stuff, I'm just like, oh, I'm sure there's multiple sides to the coin, and I'm not going to make like a sort of like an unrational sort of motion in any direction if I see a piece of content. But I think the other side of the social media sort of space is this money-making aspect, where you have the opportunity, and this is what I think is quite sinister in a way, is that there's this, X has now started doing payouts. So what that essentially means is if you have a certain number of followers and you get a certain amount of engagement over I think it's like a 3-month period, then you will actually get money from X, and that's kind of like an incentive structure similar to how YouTube has payouts on how many people watch. But what I think it's resulted in is people engaged on social media who are trying to get to the point where they can earn money from X, so much so that they have to basically, go onto it every day. They have to like post replies. They have to, there's all these gurus on there as well who are like, guys, this is how I got my first 1,000. And like, I, post it every day. You have to have like, so many replies, and a lot of it does. And I've tried it myself. You do actually get more engagement the more posts you have, but it also requires you to then like be scrolling, looking for something to reply to. And what I'm worried about is that there's almost this, it seems like it's just you that's in it, but there's probably like thousands of people that are all trying to become like this influencer class. And it's just going to end up with more people that are on social media in general. There are like, Peter Levels and those kind of people, which do still have like pretty organic content in the fact that they just like post, from the hip. But what I've started to see more recently is that the people who have, over, 50,000 to 100,000 followers are just AI generating their posts. And even through that, they are able to get enough engagement that they're able to make revenue out of this platform. And what I really dislike is that it's moved to this point where you can almost have, people who have a certain follower level can almost like check out, and they can just set up an automation with AI, and then it will just basically like sort of mine money, like kind of like the old sort of red alerts. You would just like mine money from this like social media site.
Command and Conquer generals, you could get hackers, and they just like sit there and make $7 every couple of seconds.
And so you could just have an agent or like an AI that would just create this content, and it would be like an endless stream of content, and you just make a money. And from that perspective, I feel like it's in a sense a little bit unfair, because it's you've got people that are like trying to actually engage with their followers. And I do agree that it does allow for a little bit of upward mobility. Like if you are like a solo dev, you're like interacting, trying to do marketing. But I think it is at some point it gets to, this sort of rat race of people trying to become this influencer class without ever actually making it.
Yeah, I think that social media is a great way to advertise. I mean, that's what it's. I think that's what its main purpose is. It is what its main purpose is. It has been optimized to be a good place for advertising money. Well, how would you build a social media platform that like is good for humans?
So one thing I've noticed is that people who you follow, and this is maybe just across the board, I think people need to be more definitive about how they actually train their algorithm, as some people say. If you see like bad actors, you should like actively unfollow and block them. And I think the problem with social media is that there's like, it's very easy to follow, but no one's really like looking at how many times that they unfollow people. So you can always accumulate like more and more people that you follow, and then you hardly ever like, unfollow on people, because I think people still see it. Yeah, they see it as like telling your friend that, hey, I'm not like interested in hanging out with you anymore. It's kind of like there's a little bit of like a, oh, well, what's the problem? And I see this with some other, people I've met where they like don't actively block people that they don't like. I know like Elon Musk is a big one. Like people like, oh, what has he said this? I'm just like, just block him. Like, and so I think any sort of platform that you have should have a lot more real feedback in terms of like, if people are like, using AI to post, then there should be a way to like, move that out of the system. So I think that like regulation piece of like whether it's like authentic content or not should be like part of any new platform. But I think in terms of a totally new redesign, I think like openness needs to be a part of it. But I also think it's going to be some sort of like smaller kind of communities, almost like Discord groups. Like there's a couple of like, Discord communities, but maybe with like a maximum cap where you can only have like a maximum of 100 people. And then if people aren't like actually engaging that much, then you like have a chance to like be kicked out. So that there's always like some level of activity in there, but not, this sort of endless sort of, coming in from, the millions of users that are out there. So I think it could be something that's a little bit smaller, or just kind of like Reddit, I guess, but Reddit is still like platform, like one platform, where it could be just like, the original forums that we were talking about, where you have these different platforms that have like these kind of smaller communities inside of them. What's your sort of dream of a new social media?
They've decided to start drilling next door. I'm so sorry.
I've also got workers next door too.
So I think what you said over there about like cleaning out followers or cleaning out connections is an important one, so that there isn't this whole like amassing of connections that happens. So like let's take for instance having a max of 100 friends or 200 friends or something like that. But I think also I really appreciate this is a connection, not a following follower situation, because then it changes it from a advertising platform to a social connection chat platform. Going back to, mostly chronological feeds, I actually have a couple of notes over here. So going back to chronological feeds with your images and text and video and tagging connections and stuff. But I think also like having a like maximum number of posts that you can post. So it's not like incentivizing people to just overwhelm, the platform and try and like build up clout. Instead, it's like you got 3 per day, engage with it intentionally and use it as a way to stay in touch with people. Don't use it as a way to entertain yourself. And I think that's the thing is that like we've crossed over entertainment and social media, and they're now the same thing. But I think it would actually be cool if there was a social media platform that was essentially like a simpler version of Facebook back in the day that didn't evolve over time. Instead, it just like this is just how you stay in touch with people instead of, using Instagram and stuff. Um, and it would have to be funded in such a way that it didn't require advertising, because again, with that kind of funding, it incentivizes the company to change how it operates to get more eyeballs. And so like, something like my blogging platform, if it were a social media platform, that would also kind of make sense is like, maybe you have it funded via subscriptions to extra features, but not,
Yeah.
changing the direction, changing the incentive of the platform.
Yeah. I think you would have to have a lot of funds to start that project though. And I think the challenge with any sort of social media product is that there is network effects in the fact that, people aren't going to use it if no one else uses it. Actually, there was an interesting company I once saw called Laps, and they were like they branded themselves as like the anti-social social media platform. So it was kind of similar to, I guess, Snapchat, in that you would take pictures with your phone, but the app itself would only allow you to take a maximum of like 10 pictures a day. And it was like one of those sort of disposable cameras. So what it would do is the app would actually like only allow you to take a picture, and you wouldn't be able to like review the picture and like take another one. So you were like limited to like 10 photos. And then at the end of the day, it would like develop, and then it would share it with all your friends at that point. So I thought it was quite interesting, because it was like in the moment that you're taking pictures, you're not quite sure how it turns out, and you're not really worried about it. You still capture these moments because, you talk to people and they say like, oh, I wish I took more pictures when I was like at that like awesome event. And you do have this like sort of memory palace that you can keep with your friends. But it's not like this constant like, oh, let me just retake this selfie. Let me just like redo this again. And so I kind of like that sort of like limited, but like also close, with your friends kind of vibe. And I think that would be interesting to, explore in even like a text form. But I think the other side is that with a lot of the companies that we've looked at, like we've spoken about, like Facebook, I think the problem is that they've all been funded through startup and VC mechanisms. And what that generally means is that the company has to grow to a valuation that's going to mean that they can, make money for their investors. And that usually means that at some point you have to start to bastardize the product. And you can kind of see that with like, WhatsApp and some of these other apps, which were like purely just like communication. They're all about like messaging back and forth, but now they're adding like statuses and they're adding all these other, different features. It's kind of like you need something that will just do one thing and kind of like do that okay. But I also worry that in that model, will it just become boring? Like if there's no new features, will people like still continue to use it?
So that's really that's the whole question, is that like I understand that engagement is important. Like if let's take for instance this hypothetical social media that we're talking about, we build it. It might, the timelines might just be empty. No one really uses it. That's actually likely what will happen because we've kind of like wired our brains to want this, fast on-demand video. I'm going to go onto the service because I'm seeking entertainment, and then I might also post as well. Or, I want some kind of social validation. And so, slow social media might not actually work, at least outside for the broader population. But I could definitely see like niche communities using it. Like I could see this hypothetical application being a great way for an extended family to stay in touch with each other, right? And everyone just has the app on their phone. And instead of like sharing the funny picture onto all the disparate WhatsApp groups, you just share it on there with your 100 closest connections. And there you go.
Yeah. And I think there's also like, I also like the idea of curation. And it would be maybe an interesting experiment, like kind of like, so a lot of podcasts run on RSS feeds and having basically like, some endpoint somewhere that you can then go and pull the MP3 file from. But if you took this and you made it instead for video, where you have videos that you could share via RSS, which I don't know if you can with like modern like podcast products, but you have like, you need to have a way for other people to host their own content. Because I think part of the problem is the centralization of the content into places like YouTube that causes these misincentives. So if I, as a creator, could create my own content, but then you have an app where you can specify that I only want to watch for like 1 hour a day. And what it would do is it would like go to different sources that you maybe like or don't like, or, whatever you choose. And you could say it could like pick out different, videos for you to a maximum of 1 hour, because one of the challenges with social media is it always recommends more stuff for you to watch, right? So you kind of say, this is the kind of content that I like, you just show me like an hour's worth of content, and then at the end it like stops and you can't watch anymore. And in that sense you would maybe have these like, I guess, curators similar to like an art curator who could like say like, these are cool pieces of content that I think people are worth seeing. It's a bit educational. It's maybe like documentaries. And then you would just maybe subscribe to like those different people. So it could be kind of like a little bit decentralized. You have like the control element in it. So you maybe don't have that much sort of costs as an app developer, but it would also be, a little bit more sort of interesting in the way that it plays out. Because I think the monetization part, it is valuable, I think, as someone who's, wanting to become a creator. And I do like the fact that people can choose that as an option. They can be, if they're, very good at, film school, they can make banging films on YouTube. But I think like part of it is just that there's like this endless scroll, right? So, and no
100%.
company is really going to want to like prevent that, because the more, the more people scroll, the more money they can make.
Yeah, I think that is the depressing reality, and hopefully, I think in the future we will look at this period of time and be like, hey guys, we like teach everyone nowadays to avoid this in the same way that like it took a while for us to start avoiding cocaine. We like told the Coca-Cola company to stop putting it in our drinks. Um, and so it may be that in the future, social media is seen as a thing that people can enjoy, but not to excess.
Yeah, kind of like alcohol and like
Yeah.
other things. I think it will, but I agree that I think it will generally trend towards that, because I
Mm.
think unless you're like really, this is, yeah, there's like a disparity that's starting to grow, and it's the people who realize that they're watching AI content and the people who
Mm.
don't realize that they're watching AI content. And I think the best case scenario is that everyone knows whether they're watching something that's authentic or whether they're watching something that's AI generated. Because as time progresses, if it is that we have people that are watching only AI content and they don't know that they're watching it, then there's a chance that it's going to like perpetuate into like a nasty scenario where everyone's just watching this AI sort of slop. And I think the best case scenario is that there's so much AI slop that people just like opt out of social media and say like, okay, I'm just going to go outside because there's no point watching all this like sort of random stuff that doesn't really make sense. And, it's just, people are just trying to make money from me. And so maybe I think people will self-regulate at that point where they're like, realize that, it's not, I don't want to be part of this machine anymore. And I'll rather just go outside and, play on the grass and do some fun
I
things.
mean, that's literally where I am. It just
Yeah.
happened, however many years ago, and now I go outside and I play on the grass.
Yeah. Well, hopefully we can look forward to those days where we have more people outside.
100%.